Illyra had scrubbed the stone floors of Castle Draven for 3 years. Ever since her village burned to the ground, she had known nothing but work. She had no family left, no home to return to, and only one thing she carried with her from that terrible night: an old woolen shawl that used to belong to her mother, and a strange mark on her shoulder that she had learned to keep hidden. The mark was shaped like a small crescent moon. It sat just below her collarbone, pale silver against her skin, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. When Illyra was a child, her mother had warned her never to let anyone see it. Marked people disappear, her mother used to whisper. Keep it covered. Always. Illyra never fully understood what that meant, but she had obeyed without question, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders every single day of her life. Now, at 19, she worked in the kitchens and hallways of Castle Draven, home of King Ronan Draven, the Alpha King. He was known across the land for his strength in battle and his coldness in peace. 5 years ago, his mate had died, and since then, he had ruled with a heart that seemed made of stone. Servants whispered that he never smiled, never laughed, and rarely spoke more than a few words to anyone unless it concerned matters of the kingdom. Illyra had never spoken to him directly. She had only seen him from a distance, striding through the halls with his guards, his amber eyes sharp and unreadable. She kept her head down whenever he passed, just like the other servants. That was the rule. Servants did not look at the king. Servants did not speak unless spoken to. Servants were meant to be invisible. On a warm afternoon in early autumn, Illyra was carrying a tall stack of clean linens up the narrow servant stairwell. The castle was busy that day, with nobles arriving for a meeting about the kingdom's borders, and everyone was rushing to prepare the guest rooms. Illyra moved quickly, trying not to be in anyone's way, when her foot caught on a loose stone near the top of the stairs. She stumbled, and the linens flew from her arms. She reached out to catch herself against the wall, but her sleeve tore at the shoulder, and her shawl slipped down, exposing the skin beneath. She barely had time to feel the cool air on her collarbone before she heard footsteps stop just a few feet away. She looked up, her heart pounding, and found herself staring directly into the amber eyes of King Ronan Draven. For a moment, neither of them moved. Illyra scrambled to gather the fallen linens, murmuring an apology, keeping her eyes low as she had been trained to do. But the king did not walk past her. He did not speak the sharp words she expected. Instead, he stood completely still, staring at her shoulder with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was something closer to disbelief. "Where did you get that mark?" His voice was low, rough, almost unsteady. Illyra's hands froze on the linens. She pulled her shawl back over her shoulder quickly, her face burning with fear. "I was born with it, Your Majesty. I am sorry. I did not mean to." "Show me again." It was not a request. Ronan crossed the small space between them, in only a few steps, and gently took hold of her arm. His grip was firm but careful, as though he were afraid she might break. He pulled the shawl aside just enough to see the crescent shape clearly, and his breath caught in his throat. Illyra had never seen the king look uncertain about anything, yet here he was, staring at her shoulder like a man who had seen a ghost. "Do you know what this is?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "My mother told me to always hide it. She said marked people disappear. That is all I know." Ronan closed his eyes for a moment, as though gathering himself. When he opened them again, he looked at her with an intensity that made her want to step back, though something in his gaze also made her want to stay. "This is a moon mark," he said. "It is not a curse, and it is not something to be ashamed of. It is the sign of a true mate. It appears only once in a person's life, and it always has a match somewhere in the world." Illyra did not understand. A match? Slowly, carefully, Ronan pulled back the collar of his own shirt, revealing a mark on his chest, identical in shape and size to the one on her shoulder. Silver, crescent-shaped, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. Illyra's breath left her all at once. She stared at the mark, then at his face, then back at the mark, unable to speak. "I have carried this mark since I was a boy," Ronan said. "I always believed it would lead me to the one person meant for me. After my mate died, I stopped believing it meant anything at all. I told myself it was only a scar, nothing more. But I was wrong. Word of what happened on the stairwell spread through the castle faster than fire through dry grass. By evening, every servant, guard, and noble in Castle Draven had heard the story. The king had found his true mate, and she was nothing more than a servant girl who scrubbed floors. The nobles were furious. They gathered in tense groups throughout the castle, whispering about how a servant could not possibly become queen, how the bloodline of the kingdom could not be tainted by someone with no name, no family, no status. Illyra heard the whispers as she walked through the halls, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear back into her old life, back into the safety of being invisible. She was summoned to the king's private study that evening. She entered with her head down, expecting to be scolded, perhaps even dismissed from her position for causing such an uproar. Instead, she found Ronan standing by the window, looking out over the kingdom he ruled, his expression heavy with thought. "I know this is frightening for you," he said without turning around. "It was frightening for me too, the day I realized what your mark meant. But I want you to know, I do not intend to send you away, and I do not intend to hide what has happened. Your Majesty," Illyra said carefully, "I do not want to cause trouble for you. I am only a servant. I was not raised to be anything more. Perhaps it would be easier if I simply returned to my duties, and we forget this ever happened." Ronan finally turned to face her. There was something raw in his eyes, something she had never expected to see from the cold Alpha King the whole kingdom feared. "Do you know why I have ruled alone for 5 years? Because I believed I would never feel anything again. My mate's death took something from me that I thought was gone forever. And then you fell on those stairs, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt something wake up inside me. I will not pretend that did not happen, and I will not ask you to pretend either." Illyra did not know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her with such honesty, let alone a king. Over the following days, Ronan insisted that Illyra be moved from the servant quarters to a proper room in the castle. She resisted at first, uncomfortable with the sudden change, but he was patient with her, never pushing too hard, always giving her the choice to say no. Slowly, Illyra began to see a different side of him. He was not cold, not truly. He was a man who had built walls around himself to survive his grief, and those walls were slowly beginning to come down. He told her stories about his childhood, about the mother who had died when he was young, about the weight of ruling a kingdom before he was even ready to be a man. Illyra, in turn, told him about her village, about the night it burned, about the family she had lost, and the fear that had followed her ever since. For the first time since that terrible night, she felt like someone truly understood her pain. But not everyone in the castle wished to see their bond succeed. Certain nobles, led quietly by a family known as House Voss, pushed hard against the match. They argued in council meetings that a servant could never be queen, that the kingdom's alliances depended on Ronan marrying someone of noble blood. Their objections grew louder with each passing day, and Illyra began to notice strange things. A servant who had once been kind to her suddenly avoided her eyes. A guard who used to greet her warmly now watched her with suspicion. She felt as though something was building beneath the surface, something dangerous. One evening, while walking through the castle gardens, Illyra overheard 2 voices speaking quietly near the stone wall. She recognized one of them as a steward who worked closely with House Voss. The words she caught made her blood run cold. They spoke of a fire, of a village burned on purpose, of marked bloodlines being hunted down before they could ever find their match. Illyra's mind raced back to that night years ago. Her village had not burned by accident. Someone had wanted her family gone, wanted her mark erased before it could ever be discovered. She went straight to Ronan and told him everything she had heard. His expression darkened as she spoke, and by the time she finished, his hands were clenched at his sides. "House Voss has opposed every union that threatens their influence for generations," he said. "If what you heard is true, then they have been hunting marked bloodlines to prevent alphas from finding true mates who could challenge their power. Your village was not the first. I fear it will not be the last, unless we stop them." Together, they began to quietly investigate. Ronan trusted only a small circle of loyal guards, men who had served his family for years, and who he knew would never betray him. Illyra, familiar with the servant passages and hidden corners of the castle that nobles rarely noticed, moved unseen through places Ronan could not go. Piece by piece, they uncovered proof. Old letters, hidden ledgers, and testimonies from servants who had seen strange visitors meeting with House Voss in secret. The evidence was undeniable. House Voss had orchestrated the destruction of several villages over the years, all in an effort to erase marked bloodlines and keep their own family's influence unchallenged within the kingdom's council. When the truth was finally revealed before the full court, the reaction was immediate. Nobles who had once sided with House Voss out of fear or convenience quickly distanced themselves once they understood the extent of the betrayal. House Voss had not only endangered innocent lives, they had directly threatened the future of the kingdom's alpha lineage. Their punishment was swift, and their influence in the court crumbled within days. Alira stood beside Ronan as the truth came to light, no longer hiding behind lowered eyes or a borrowed shawl. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like someone who needed to disappear. She felt seen, truly seen, not just by the king who loved her, but by an entire kingdom that finally understood what she had survived. In the weeks that followed, the castle began to heal. Ronan worked to rebuild trust among the nobles who remained loyal, while also ensuring that other marked bloodlines across the kingdom would be protected rather than hunted. Alira, meanwhile, found herself slowly stepping into a role she never imagined for herself, learning the customs of the court, sitting beside Ronan during council meetings, and speaking with a confidence she never knew she had. On the day of their bonding ceremony, the same throne room Alira used to clean in silence was filled with light and color. Nobles who had once whispered against her now stood respectfully as she walked through the hall. Ronan waited for her at the end of the aisle, his amber eyes soft in a way the whole kingdom had forgotten he was capable of. As she reached him, he took her hand gently, the same hand that had once carried buckets of water and scrubbed castle floors without complaint. "You were never only a servant," he said quietly, just for her to hear. "You were always meant to stand here." Alira looked around at the room, at the people who had once looked past her without a second glance, and felt something settle deep in her chest. The mark beneath her skin, once a secret she had been taught to fear, was now a symbol of everything she had survived and everything she was becoming. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a servant in his castle. She was his queen, chosen not by title or by blood, but by a bond stronger than either, and by a strength she had carried with her long before anyone ever saw the mark beneath her skin.